Welcome to the Story of Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie video. All right, so the main source for this video is going to be the following book, as pictured here. It's called Bruce R. McConkie, Apostle and Polemicist, 1915 to 1985, by the Mormon historian Devery S. Anderson. Signature Books, 2024. This book just came out. Highly recommend it. I also recommend Devery S. Anderson's previous books. All right, so I'm going to use the book that I talked about on the previous slide. For that book, all of the stuff I take out of there, I'm just going to give the page number. I'm not going to give the entire source on upcoming slides. So you can see on this slide, it's going to be page 81. McConkie started the book when he was in the military. That is, he started the book Mormon Doctrine when he was in the military. McConkie was in the military between the years of 1942 to 1946. First edition of Mormon Doctrine came out in 1958. So about, 12 to 16 years later, after he was in the military, is when the book finally came out. So he probably worked on it for a long time. All right, so McConkie was a member of the First Council of the 70 when the book Mormon Doctrine came out. He would go on to become an apostle in 1972. So that would be about 14 years after Mormon Doctrine came out. McConkie became an apostle, but when it first came out, he was a 70. Okay, Mormon Doctrine would be McConkie's most popular book, making him a household name among most active Latter-day Saints. Here is the dust jacket, or the cover of the first edition of Mormon Doctrine. A Compendium of the Gospel was its subtitle for the first edition. All right, this book would also be his most controversial book. All right, Mormon Doctrine was a 776-page volume, kind of a one-volume encyclopedia. All right, Mormon Doctrine was a first written in encyclopedic form. It is the first extensive compendium of the whole gospel. Since then, there's been several others, which I have. Okay, the book contained over 2,000 entries arranged alphabetically, so basically like 2,000 short articles, and some not so short. All right, Mormon Doctrine was not an official publication of the church, McConkie pointed out, and for the work itself, I, McConkie, assume sole and full responsibility. All right, page 82 of the book that we talked about by Anderson. Mormon Doctrine sold well from the beginning, but that soon became a concern to President or Prophet David O. McKay, thanks to his second counselor in the first presidency, J. Reuben Clark, who briefed McKay about the book. Okay, a memorandum from J. Reuben Clark, July 9, 1958. Clark was concerned about the book. He wasted no time in consulting David O. McKay, the president of the church. And Clark said, I was urgent in saying that I did it only because I felt that McKay must know. I was sure that we had to do something, because this book would raise more trouble than anything that we had in the church for a long while. This book would raise a lot of trouble. But McConkie kept the book quiet until it hit the shelves in 1958. McConkie soon learned that Mormon Doctrine was creating a buzz that he had not expected nor wanted. It had been 3 months since McKay and Clark had discussed the book, and so far they had done nothing about the matter. So for 3 months, the book was out, and nothing was being done about it. But some of their feared backlash was about to begin which undoubtedly played a role that finally forced them to act. Okay, in an entry entitled Church of the Devil, a phrase from the Book of Mormon, McConkie said that it would be defined in two ways. The first way was all churches or organizations of whatever name or nature, whether political, philosophical, educational, economic, social, fraternal, civic, or religious, which are designed to take men on a course that leads away from God and his laws, and thus from salvation in the kingdom of God. So all of these types of organizations could be churches of the devil, depending on what they taught, I guess. All right, the second definition of church of the devil was not vague at all. McConkie said in the book, the Roman Catholic Church specifically singled out, set apart, described, and designated as being most abominable above all other churches. All right, so McConkie said that 1 Nephi 13, verse 5, was talking about the Catholic Church in the scripture. So, what does this scripture say in the Book of Mormon? And the angel said unto me, behold, the formation of a church, which is most abominable above all other churches, which slayeth the saints of God, yea, and tortureth them, and bindeth them down, and yoketh them with a yoke of iron, and bringeth them down into captivity. This abominable church, Catholic Church, according to McConkie, and other people would probably agree with McConkie that that's what this verse is talking about. Okay, other articles in Mormon Doctrine were critical of Catholicism and were found under the headings of indulgences, Mariolatry, penance, supererogation, and transubstantiation. Indulgences, that's basically paying money for forgiveness of sins. Mariolatry is an idolatrous worship of the Virgin Mary. Penance, supererogation. So supererogation is actions believed to form a reserve fund of merit that can be drawn on by prayer in favor of the sinners. So your good works, I guess, can kind of be put in the bank. Transubstantiation we'll talk about. Okay, another source that I used for this video is from Sterling Adams. The end of Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon Doctrine article in the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal, fall and winter of 2012. So Adams says, notably, Mormon Doctrine parroted some of the worst anti-Catholic rhetoric found among previous generations of American Protestants. All right, Adams continues, after describing the practice of priestly celibacy as an evil, wicked system, McConkie mockingly advised the priests to make themselves eunuchs rather than just abstain from marriage. Okay, Sterling Adams continues, John Whitmer Historical Association Journal. In another entry, McConkie described the Catholic belief of transubstantiation as one of the most obviously false, absurd, and ridiculous doctrines espoused by that great church, which is not the Lord's church. That's what McConkie said. Yeah, transubstantiation, basically you take the sacrament or the Eucharist, and the little cracker or the bread actually becomes the body of Christ, and the wine or the water actually becomes his blood, and you're actually eating and drinking Christ's body and blood, literally. All right, McConkie continues here. The doctrine is a sort of religious cannibalism, which partakes measurably of the same spirit and is enshrouded by the same blanket of satanic darkness as the murderous, blood-drinking orgies of the most degenerate pagan peoples. Catholic Church, enshrouded in satanic darkness, compares them to the blood-drinking orgies of the pagans. All right, same article by Sterling Adams here. In effect, in administering their sacramental Mass, Catholic priests are supposedly bringing Christ back to life so that he can be sacrificed over again through the Mass, thus making his own literal flesh and blood available for repeated cannibalistic consumption. Now, of course, I think this is a pretty ridiculous teaching as well, but the way that McConkie describes it is pretty over the top. All right, McConkie continues here. Such views are so far removed from sense and reason that they should be rejected as hideous absurdities, even in the absence of revelations refuting them. So these are the kind of statements that they had to take out from the first edition when they finally put the second edition out. Okay, in addition to 24 entries criticizing Catholic teachings, McConkie sprinkled throughout the book over 30 references to the Catholic Church as great and abominable mother of harlots and church of the devil, or similar terms. And pictured above, we have the mother of harlots. Some of these images in this video are AI. So this is one of them. Okay, back to the book by Anderson, page 84. McConkie was not the first church leader to criticize Catholicism, or even to apply this Book of Mormon verse to them. That had already been done by J. Reuben Clark and B.H. Roberts in the 1930s and 1940s. McConkie, however, took it to a new level. Pictured above, B.H. Roberts. Okay, page 84. Dwayne G. Hunt, pictured above, then the bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City, was hurt by McConkie's characterization of his church, and after the general election of 1958, Hunt visited the Mormon David S. King, who had just been elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. A tearful Hunt, holding a copy of Mormon Doctrine, said, "We are your friends. We don't deserve this kind of treatment." All right. Hunt also went to the President McKay, or the Prophet McKay, to complain. McKay's son Lawrence remembered Hunt asking, "Is this the attitude of the church? That the Catholic Church is the great and abominable church, as expressed in his latest book by Bruce R. McConkie?" President McKay was embarrassed and perhaps even outraged. Okay, McConkie not only failed to tell the presiding brethren about Mormon Doctrine in advance of publishing it, but his father-in-law, president of the Quorum of the 12, Joseph Fielding Smith, claimed that he was never told about it either. Yet, for as often as McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith interacted, it seems improbable that Smith had remained completely in the dark about it. Yep, makes sense to me. Okay, page 85 of Devery Anderson's book. On January 5th, 1959, McKay asked the Apostle Marion G. Romney, pictured above, to review the book, and he submitted his report only 3 weeks later on January 28th. Pretty fast review for such a large book. All right, so page 85 of Anderson's book. This is from Marion G. Romney, guest letter to David O. McKay, January 28th, 1959. This is recorded in David O. McKay's diary. So Romney said that Mormon Doctrine's nature and scope and the authoritative tone of the style in which it is written pose the question as to the propriety of the author's attempting such a project without assignment and supervision, he kind of did it on his own, from him whose right and responsibility it is to speak for the church on Mormon doctrine. So he's probably saying that is the right of the prophet, the first presidency, maybe the Quorum of the 12 as a whole. So basically saying that McConkie didn't have the authority to write such a book. Okay, that supervision could have spared McConkie all the controversy surrounding the work if he would have passed it by, the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 for approval. Okay, same source here, same letter from Romney to McKay, January 28, 1959, in David O. McKay's diary. Romney then listed dozens of problematic teachings from the book that he grouped into 4 different categories. First, McConkie's unflattering characterizations of other churches, especially the Catholic Church, his certitude around various controversial doctrines or teachings, miscellaneous interpretations, and finally, McConkie's use of words such as apostate to characterize others in a negative way. All right, Romney concluded his letter by saying, I have promised to contact Marvin Wallen, manager of Bookcraft Company, by the 9th of February about the 4,000-volume edition of Mormon Doctrine, which he is holding. Marvin Wallen, manager of Bookcraft, he's pictured above. Bookcraft was the publisher that McConkie used to publish this book. Apparently, at this time, it really wasn't owned by the church. I think it was an independent company that Deseret Book eventually bought. This first edition, sounds like, was 4,000 copies, so not a tremendous amount. And Romney wanted to talk to Marvin about it. All right, page 85. President McKay was very concerned about this book. And he records in his diary notes on February 6, 1959, that during a meeting of the First Presidency, McKay stated that the general authorities of the church should be informed that the First Presidency expects no book to be published unless it be first submitted, I guess, to the First Presidency. The authority will still be the author of the book, but the First Presidency wants to know what is in the book before it is published. In the minds of the people, the general authorities in their individual capacities cannot be separated from them in their official capacities, right? So people are going to look at McConkie as a general authority of the church, a member of the 70, and it's hard to separate that from his individual capacity, or what he basically says he takes full responsibility for the book. All right, same book here, page 85. 2 days later, McKay came to his office, called up First Presidency Secretary Joseph Anderson, pictured above, and asked him to get a copy of Mormon Doctrine and put it on his desk. So McKay is going to check out this book and see what's so controversial about it. All right, so a February 11th meeting between McKay and McConkie. This is also recorded in McKay's diary in 1959. McKay took the book home and began to study it that night. He made an outline of questions that I shall take up with Brother McConkie when he meets with the First Presidency next Wednesday morning. Okay, although McKay's diary says nothing about the discussion that took place during the meeting, 6 days later, McConkie wrote letters addressed to the editors of both the church's monthly magazine, The Improvement Era, and its weekly church news, which he obviously did at the First Presidency's insistence. So they told him to write some letters, probably basically saying, I'm solely responsible from this book. Don't think that this is the First Presidency or the church saying this stuff. All right, so here is some of the content of those letters, I guess. So McConkie says, as you may know, I, McConkie, am the author of a book entitled Mormon Doctrine, an encyclopedia-type publication which attempts to digest and explain many of the basic doctrines of the church. Pictured above, an AI painting of McConkie. They get McConkie pretty good as far as how he looks, but not exactly. Addressing the issue as to whether the book had official church approval or whether it contains only my personal views, McConkie stressed that it was not endorsed by the church and contains my personal views only, and I am solely responsible for all the statements or opinions expressed in it. McConkie wrote also that although he intended to present accurately the doctrines of the church, he was not trying to speak on behalf of the church. All right, McConkie added a memo to President McKay that said, "If I caught the vision of what should be done, perhaps these letters will help. If you think they should be changed, modified, or expanded in any way, I will be happy to revise them." So Bruce R. McConkie, kind of good at obeying the brethren, right? He's a company man. All right. And then we have a letter from the First Presidency, which is David O. McKay, Stephen L. Richards, and J. Reuben Clark. Letter from them to Bruce R. McConkie, February 18, 1959. So the First Presidency wrote McConkie the following day to inform him that his letters were considered this morning by the First Presidency, and we feel that they do not cover the situation as it was discussed by us, and particularly that they do not conform to the ideas that we have, that you cannot be disassociated from your official position in the publication of such a manuscript. The letters do not indicate that there will be corrections of items which you yourself indicated were over or not well stated. All right, so it appears that McConkie's letters were never sent into the Improvement Era or the Deseret News for this reason. On the previous slide, the presidency suggested that pending the final disposition of this problem, no further edition of the book be printed. So from 1959, or early in 1959, up until 1966, this book was basically banned. So what is that? About 7 years? Mormon Doctrine was banned. There was to be no further edition of it, and we'll talk more about this on other slides. All right, the story continues, page 87. The matter would not be resolved anytime soon. 2 weeks later, on March 5th, McKay asked to see Apostles Marky Petersen and Marion G. Romney. Petersen pictured above. All right, McKay Diary, March 5th, 1959. Although Romney had already submitted a preliminary report in January, McKay directed the two men, the two apostles, to read Mormon Doctrine and make a list of the corrections that should be made preparatory to his sending out an addendum to all members of the church who have purchased his book. We're going to kind of explain to the members that some of this stuff is not endorsed by the church. All right. It took 10 months. It took 10 months for Petersen and Romney to review Mormon Doctrine, but on January 7, 1960, the two apostles had finished their report. All right, they confirmed that the manuscript had never been given to the reading committee prior to publication, and that President Joseph Fielding Smith did not know anything about it until it was published. That's probably unlikely. Okay, Petersen said that he had marked up his own copy of the book, which listed 1,067 errors in it. And that some could be found on almost every page. Lots of errors. Going to be really hard to revise the book if it has that many errors, right? Okay, Petersen urged that no book should be published without a specific approval of the First Presidency. So, yeah, books back in this time didn't have as much correlation, didn't have as much oversight from the Correlation Committee or higher up general authorities, which I kind of found to be a lot more interesting than once everything got homogenized and completely correlated. Everything became super boring. They still had to deal with the fact that the book was already in the hands of thousands of church members. What they say, about 4,000 members, and it was selling well. Okay, the number of corrections needed was such that a revised version would be such an extensive repudiation of the original as to destroy the credit of the author. So the plan was not to republish this book. And, with only 4,000 copies, it wouldn't have made that much of an impact. All right, so again from McKay's diary, January 7th, 1960. Thus, they decided that it should not be republished and that the book should be repudiated in such a way as to save the career of the author as one of the general authorities of the church. Okay, same source here. They directed Petersen to prepare an editorial for the Improvement Era addressing the situation, but he would first submit a draft to them for approval. All right, the First Presidency met again the next day and discussed reports that had come to them indicating that McConkie had made corrections to the book and was planning to publish a revised edition. Okay, McKay's diary, January 8th, 1960, page 88 of Anderson's book. They were adamant, however, that Mormon Doctrine must not be republished, as it is full of errors and misstatements, and it is most unfortunate that it has received such wide circulation. So they really didn't like this book. This book was effectively banned, like for the next 6-7 years. Okay, Petersen turned in the draft of his editorial 6 days later, which he titled Seek Ye Out of the Best Books, which is a scripture in D&C 88, verse 118. All right, so Sterling Adams talks about this editorial as well. Petersen stated that persons without the necessary background and far from being expert in their fields at times undertake to make authoritative statements which mislead many and which too often do not represent the accepted facts. So Bruce R. McConkie, a 70, according to Petersen, doesn't have the necessary background. He's not an expert. He's not authoritative. He's going to mislead many, and he's not going to represent the facts properly. But the ironic thing is this book went on to be quite authoritative because the members of the church loved it. Okay, Petersen continues, at times, members of the general authorities of the church have published such material, some of which has been misunderstood, some being actually inaccurate or speculative. He's talking about Bruce R. McConkie here. This Mormon doctrine is being misunderstood. It's actually inaccurate. All right, so what's one of the favorite things general authorities like to do is they like to blame the members of the church. Blame the victim, right? Petersen noted that speculation becomes rife at times. Private interpretations of doctrine and extremes of doctrine or extremes of dogma are thrust upon an unsuspecting public, some of whom seem to accept any unusual idea that is promulgated if they see it in print. So the members, they're so stupid, they're so unsuspecting, right, that they'll accept anything as long as it's in print. Okay, Petersen continues, page 88. Some of these are geared toward Latter-day Saints and even come from the church's general authorities. This is dangerous ground that Petersen is talking about here, saying we can't trust the general authorities. But, McConkie's only a 70, so maybe it's okay to throw the 70s under the bus. So Petersen continues, when the brethren have done this, they have acted upon their own responsibility. Yeah, you, McConkie. Doing so without the knowledge or the consent of the presiding authorities of the church. All right, these works should never be accepted as the official voice of the church, One such book, Petersen said, was the recently published Mormon Doctrine by Elder Bruce R. McConkie of the First Council of the 70. This volume presumes to give the final word on many doctrines of the Church, some of which have never been completely explained, even in Revelations. Okay, in the end, the presidency decided that Petersen should pull direct references to the book Mormon Doctrine, so we're not going to have direct references to that, and that the editorial should simply focus on the subject of selecting good books. Okay, but any final decision on publishing the editorial at all would be postponed until after a meeting between McKay and Joseph Fielding Smith. This is the McKay diary again, January 14th, 1960, page 89 in Anderson's book. You can see the source here for the editorial from Petersen. Okay, McKay called Joseph Fielding Smith on Wednesday, January 27th, and I believe he's president of the 12 at this time, and told him that we are a unit in disapproving of Brother Bruce R. McConkie's book, Mormon Doctrine. We are a unit in disapproving of it as an authoritative exposition of the principles of the gospel. All right, so McKay is now meeting with Smith. He says, now, Brother Smith, McConkie is a general authority, and we do not want to give him a public rebuke that would be embarrassing to him and lessen his influence with the members of the church. All right, McKay planned to announce at the meeting with the 12 the following day in the Salt Lake Temple that Mormon Doctrine is not approved as an authoritative book and that it should not be republished, even if the errors, some 1,067 of them, are corrected. So it should not be republished, even if the errors are fixed. All right, so Smith says that is the best thing to do. McKay next said that he had learned that McConkie is advocating by letter some of the principles as printed in his book in answer to letters that he receives. So it seems like the First Presidency and the 12 were basically agreeing as a unit. So Smith did not stand up to them at this time, even though he's probably a pretty major supporter of McConkie. And if you read both Smith and McConkie's works, there's a lot of agreement between the two. Okay, so also in McKay's diary here, I will speak to him about that, Smith responded. See, so they kind of had this close relationship. He is also speaking on these subjects, McKay then told him, and Smith says, I will speak to him about that also. Smith also believed as wise the proposed policy that books by general authorities must first be submitted for approval. Pictured above, McConkie speaking. This is AI art, and pretty good, I think. Okay, that next day, McKay reported to his counselors in the First Presidency his conversation with Smith, Joseph Fielding Smith. It was decided that the First Presidency should inform Brother McConkie before he learns of our decision from some other source. So Brother McConkie was asked to come into our meeting this morning, and their decision, basically the book should be banned. Okay, when McKay told him that the First Presidency did not want the book to be republished, McConkie agreed. He pushes this issue down the line, but he wouldn't forget about it, and then he would come back and try to get it republished later, which we'll talk about. They then recommended that McConkie answer inquiries on the subject with care, because all this stuff is kind of embarrassing. But now we have pretty good access to the David O. McKay diaries, so it's all out there. I think we owe that largely to Greg Prince and his book on David O. McKay. All right, so McConkie agrees to be obedient to the brethren. I am amenable to whatever you brethren want. I will do exactly what you want. I will be as discreet and as wise as I can. So he's acting like a good, obedient little dog. But he and I think Joseph Fielding Smith will try to get this done later. Okay, McKay Diary again, January 28, 1960, page 90 of Anderson's book. He, McConkie, promised that he would not express any views that went counter to those that the presidency had stated, and he would conform to their wishes completely. So that's what the Mormon Church is all about, right? Obedience, conformity. See the picture above, done by AI. Although they're not quite total conformity. AI put on different colored ties, which I guess is the same in the Mormon Church, right? Different colored eyes, but basically conformity. Okay, later that afternoon, the First Presidency and the Council of the 12 met in the temple and discussed the McConkie meeting from that morning. All right, McKay emphasized once again that Mormon doctrine had caused considerable comment throughout the church, people kind of whispering about it, and that it has been a source of concern to the brethren ever since it was published. Okay, the recommendation was that the book be not republished, that it be not republished even in corrected form, even though Brother McConkie mentions in the book that he takes all responsibility for it, and that it be not recognized as an authoritative book. And because the members like this book so much, actually the opposite occurred once the second edition was published, and we'll go over all that. Okay, there would be no public rebuke because that could seriously damage McConkie's influence within the church. And as a result, Petersen's editorial, even with its revisions, never appeared in the improvement era. So Petersen's editorial canceled. All right, page 91, McKay Diary, January 28th, 1960. So, a couple years after the book was published. The First Presidency recommend that the situation be left as it is, and whenever a question about it arises, we can answer that it is unauthoritative. Mormon doctrine is unauthoritative. That it was issued by Brother McConkie on his own responsibility, and he must answer for it. Okay, in 1961, McConkie was called to be the president of the Southern Australia Mission. All right, was there any correlation between this calling and the hullabaloo surrounding Mormon doctrine? Maybe they sent him away. All right, page 96 of Anderson's book. If so, it would not be the only time a general authority was assigned to preside over a mission to temporarily remove them from a church headquarters position and lessen their influence among members. This also happened to Apostle Ezra Taft Benson when he got too political and he was talking all his conspiracy theories and John Birch kind of stuff. So there is precedent for this. All right, McConkie even made a joke about this. Page 97, when someone asked McConkie what led to the call to Australia, he thought about one of his censored works, which was called How to Start a Cult, and said, well, I have been writing again. So he knew that he was causing controversy with his writing, and he thought maybe that was why he got sent to Australia himself. There's an organization called Mormon Leaks. I think they have this censored work, How to Start a Cult, and they have some other works from McConkie over there too. You can go to mormonleaks.org, I think. All right, so McConkie did not forget about Mormon doctrine, and he was still trying to get a second edition published. Page 117. McConkie came to see President David O. McKay by prearrangement on July 5th, 1966. This is like 5 years later. maybe about 8 years since Mormon Doctrine was published. So he came to see David O. McKay, the president and prophet of the church, and he asked the 92-year-old president about the possibility of republishing Mormon Doctrine. So David O. McKay's memory's probably not very good at this point. Probably suffering somehow in that way. All right, so David O. McKay diary entry, July 5th, 1966. McKay's diary notes that I asked him, McConkie, a number of questions about the original publication, about the need for the book, and asked him to give me the facts about what has been done since we stopped the publishing of the book. But he may be forgetting some of the details. Okay, same source. In response, McConkie said that one of the brethren had read Mormon Doctrine thoroughly, but that no one has gone over the corrections that he has made since the reading. All right, McKay said that Apostle Spencer W. Kimball, former chairman of the reading committee, would go over McConkie's changes. And this is what AI thinks President Kimball looks like. Not exactly right. Okay, 3 days later, at the request of McKay's secretary, Claire Middlemiss, see the picture above, McConkie followed up about the matter in a memo to her. All right, Middlemiss, another picture above, who kept McKay's diary at this time, used this memo to form the basis for the journal entry documenting the meeting between her boss and McConkie. Okay, there is one significant difference between McConkie's memo and McKay's diary entry, however. What was this big difference? Okay, the diary says that I, McKay, told Brother McConkie that should the book be republished at this time, he would be responsible for what is in it, and that it will not be a church publication. Should the book be republished? He's not telling McConkie that it's okay to republish it. He's just saying, well, should this happen? Okay, but McConkie's memo is a little bit different. In the memo, he states that President McKay indicated that the book should be republished at this time. We should go ahead with it. We should publish it. He said that I would be responsible for what is in it, and that it would not be a church publication. So is McConkie here manipulating the 92-year-old president? All right, so a few days later, I think 3 days later, there is something from Bruce R. McConkie to Claire Middlemiss, July 8th, 1966. This is in David O. McKay's diary under the same date, July 8, 1966. This is according to Anderson, McConkie, in other words, claims that McKay gave him a mandate to republish the book, while McKay's diary suggests that the church president was hesitant and would only allow it provided certain conditions were met. Middlemiss may have sought clarification from McKay and thus worded the diary to reflect what she concluded was his take on the meeting. All right, page 118, and this is Anderson. He says, why did McKay grant that even a corrected version of Mormon Doctrine be published, considering that he, his counselors in the First Presidency, and the 12 were all adamantly opposed? They're all adamantly opposed to the idea just 6 years earlier. All right, by 1966, First Presidency counselors J. Reuben Clark and Stephen L. Richards were both dead, so they couldn't protest, and they were in on the original discussions, right? Clark pictured up here on the left and Richards on the right. All right, McKay, at 92 years old and in failing health, may have been more easily manipulated and may not have accurately recalled those earlier discussions and all the associated controversy over the book. So did McConkie take advantage of him? Seems like there's fairly decent evidence for this. All right, a little bit of information from Ernest L. Wilkinson's diary, July 7th, 1965. So this is like a year earlier. Wilkinson was president of BYU. Middle Miss told Wilkinson a year earlier that McKay was slowly deteriorating and that he does not remember anything after conferences that are had with him unless he has a written memorandum on it. And this is a year earlier, so he's probably even worse a year later. Okay, so we know that Joseph Fielding Smith was pretty good buddies with McConkie. Smith became a member of the First Presidency in 1965, and so his influence with McKay had grown quite a bit, so maybe he had something to do with convincing McKay as well. All right, it is possible that McConkie asked his father-in-law, Joseph Fielding Smith, to try to warm McKay to the idea, and that the July 5th meeting came about because of that. In fact, Smith may have been the man among the brethren whom McConkie told McKay had read it thoroughly, that is, read Mormon Doctrine thoroughly. I'm sure he read it. Those two were two peas in the pod. They shared a lot of the same orthodox beliefs. But McKay would not have directed the publication of a book not officially under church auspices, and then warn the author that he would be responsible for its contents. Okay, McConkie noted to Middle Miss that he had already talked with Apostle Spencer W. Kimball about reviewing the changes to Mormon Doctrine, and that Brother Kimball graciously agreed to do this as his time and circumstances permitted. All right, any review of the book that he undertook, that is Kimball, or supervision that he gave McConkie was not significant enough for Kimball to even mention it in his journal. Not significant enough to mention. But whatever attention he gave the matter was done quickly, so it probably wasn't real thorough, right? According to Anderson. Okay, 4 months after McConkie and McKay met, on November 11th, newspapers began advertising the second edition of Mormon Doctrine, which was by then available for sale. So here's one of those ads in the Improvement era. Just off the press, and one of the books there is Mormon Doctrine, and I got a little picture there of McConkie. And this is what it said: Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie, a compendium of the gospel that has been revised and enlarged, a must for every LDS library, 875 pages with fingertip reference, cost $6.95. So books used to be a lot cheaper. All right, Anderson tells us about a little bit of information from McConkie's son, Joseph Fielding McConkie, who put out a book called The Bruce R. McConkie Story, see picture above on the right, in 2003. McConkie's son, Joseph, says that Kimball provided a report to the First Presidency after completing his task, and that he went over 56 changes that McConkie had made to Mormon Doctrine, and he approved them all. But as you remember, there was a lot more changes than that. Marky Petersen and who was it? Romney had found. Here's another ad for Mormon Doctrine. It says, a summary of all fundamental doctrines of the gospel, ideal for personal study, priesthood classes, gospel study, and missionary work. Summary of all fundamental doctrines. So they're kind of going with it now. All right, Anderson says, it is puzzling that McKay asked Kimball to do this after Apostles Marion G. Romney and Marky Petersen had spent nearly a year examining the book and knew it better than anyone. But they weren't asked to do it this time. For some reason, Kimball was. All right, although Romney had spelled out several problems with the first edition, in his January 28, 1959 letter to McKay following his own reading, the expanded committee in 1960 found that Mormon Doctrine contained 1,067 errors. And what, Kimball found like 50-something? All right, so all those errors were never made public and may not have even been shown to McConkie, since at the time the First Presidency opted to have the book go out of print rather than allow McConkie to publish a revised version. All right, whatever those errors were, we'll probably never know. The second edition clearly failed to address more than a handful of them, but there were far more changes made than the 56 that Joseph McConkie admits to. Okay, that number affected only the changes made to the blatant anti-Catholic references, which softened the rhetoric. All right, total changes numbered around 480 in the second edition, but 80% of those only affected the tone, thus the original meaning remained intact. Okay, McConkie added 8 new entries and deleted 25 others. There were 93 words or phrases removed, while 250 other changes affected an entry's wording. All right, so Mormon Doctrine went on to be one of the most popular Mormon books ever. The book went on to sell several 100,000 copies, which is a lot for a Mormon book, over the next several decades, and has been used and cited by members more than almost any LDS title outside of the Scriptures. So a lot of the Orthodox members, they just really grabbed onto this. Okay, back to Sterling Adams' article. Mormon Doctrine eventually went through dozens of printings and was translated into multiple languages. 3 that I know about are Spanish, Japanese, and German. Here is a printing press for a book. The book's name is The Touch of Light. Okay, Peggy Fletcher Stack did an article in the Salt Lake Tribune in 2010 entitled Mormon Doctrine Goes Out of Print. Peggy says Mormon Doctrine went through 40 printings, so she gives a more specific number. 40 printings, that's a lot, selling hundreds of thousands of copies. All right, so it's funny how things work out. This is from Gregory A. Prince and Bob Wright's book, David O. McKay and the Rise of Modern Mormonism, 2005. Very good book. Prince on the left here, the cover of the book on the right. So Prince and Wright say Mormon Doctrine became one of the all-time bestsellers in Mormondom, achieving the near-canonical status that McKay had fought unsuccessfully to avoid, and setting a tone of doctrinal fundamentalism antithetical to McKay's personal philosophy that remains a legacy of the Church to this day. In 2005, Church had let it go out of print in 2010, which we'll get to some reasons for that. All right, in time, the entries on race proved to be problematic, but nobody really cared in 1958 or in 1966. Tells you a lot about where the heads of the leaders of the church were. They weren't really thinking that these statements were particularly racist, or if they did, they didn't really care, because none of those things were kind of highlighted as problems. But it was well over a decade before McConkie gave any thought to those race entries. Pictured above, a statue at BYU. Somebody dumped red paint on a statue of Brigham Young, calling him a racist. Okay, an entry in Mormon Doctrine titled Negroes maintained that the priesthood ban's root cause had to do with the preexistence, the period before birth, where in LDS theology those born into mortality live with God before coming to the earth. And McConkie would get this kind of stuff from Joseph Fielding Smith, probably looking at his speeches and Smith's book, The Way to Perfection. All right, just a few passages from Mormon Doctrine here. Those who were less valiant in the pre-existence and who thereby had certain spiritual restrictions imposed upon them during mortality are known to us as the Negroes. Less valiant and had spiritual restrictions on them. Such spirits are sent to earth through the lineage of Cain, the mark put upon him for his rebellion against God and his murder of Abel, being a black skin. What is the mark? Black skin. Some apologists try to get around that nowadays. Okay, McConkie continued, the Negroes are not equal with other races where the receipt of certain spiritual blessings are concerned, particularly the priesthood and the temple blessings that flow therefrom. Couldn't have the priesthood, couldn't go to the temple. But this inequality is not of man's origin, it is the Lord's doing. So the Mormon leaders never blame the general authorities, the apostles and prophets of the church. They always pin this racist doctrine on God or on the Lord. All right, so here's what Anderson says, page 121. McConkie made no changes to his racial teachings between the first and second editions because his view of blacks mirrored those found in LDS teachings at the time, mirrored it. And nothing he said on the subject was controversial to his colleagues or to most church members. Very controversial nowadays, however. Okay, Mormon Doctrine also stated that racial degeneration resulting in differences in appearances and spiritual aptitude has arisen since the fall of Adam. We know the circumstances under which the posterity of Cain were cursed, McConkie says, with what we call Negroid racial characteristics. The Book of Mormon explains why the Lamanites received dark skin and a degenerate status, which is something apologists try to get away from too, but the Book of Mormon is blatantly racist. It says dark or black skin in there is a curse, and yeah, degenerate and dark and loathsome, whereas white is delightsome. This is an AI picture of Cain with the dark skin. Okay, back to Sterling Adams' article, The End of Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon Doctrine, 2012. Like we said, the church stopped publishing it in 2010. There's a lot more controversial stuff in there than just race stuff, and the church is now trying to get away from the book. We'll talk more about that on some upcoming slides. So Sterling Adams says that Mormon doctrine emphasized a person's literal ancestry or blood lineage as a key determinant of a person's place in the church and before God. 85 entries in Mormon doctrine either described race or lineage as a curse or a blessing. 85 entries. Or expressed assumptions about how a person or people would act because of race or lineage. You know, the lineage of Cain, the lineage of Ham is cursed and doesn't have all the blessings, whereas like the lineage of Ephraim, which a lot of the other members of the church get, is more of righteous and special lineage, right? It's a blessing. Okay, Adams also talks about birth control, another controversial issue in Mormon doctrine. McConkie also aimed his sharp tongue at other Mormons. He says that church members who practiced birth control were in rebellion against God and guilty of gross wickedness. But nowadays, probably almost every Mormon family practices some sort of birth control. Church has really lightened up on this. Okay, Adams continues. McConkie talks about evolution, says that members of the church that basically believe in evolution are scrubby and groveling intellectually. So what, they're basically stupid? McConkie says, or Adams says, in the article on evolution, the single longest entry in the book, McConkie mocked his fellow church members who believed in evolution, as he mocked them as having a scrubby and groveling intellectuality. All right, a pretty long statement here from Adam's article. He says, some examples of Mormon doctrine's contents that seem to vary importantly from consensus Mormon doctrine as represented by LDS Scripture and the teachings of contemporary church leaders included McConkie's preaching in support of the 19th century Mormon concept of blood atonement. This differs from a lot of other teaching in the church, I guess, at the time. I did a whole video on blood atonement. McConkie's related claim that capital punishment was divinely required, and governments that did not practice capital punishment were in apostasy, right? Because that's part of blood atonement. It's better and it's best to shoot people with a bullet to spill their blood, also from blood atonement, if we're going to use capital punishment. McConkie's declaration that sin led to racial degeneration in black Africans that had caused each variation from the physical and spiritual perfections of pale-skinned forebears. So, yeah, the whites were physically and spiritually perfect, and blacks not. And various entries that identified actions for which McConkie seemed to believe repentance was either actually or practically impossible. That's also part of blood atonement, right? Probably things like murder, adultery, probably. All right, here's another source by David A. Dye, Changes in Mormon Doctrine, a comparison of the 1958 and 1966 versions of Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie, 2007. We'll talk about a few of the changes. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on this because I did a whole entire video based on this book. Changes in Mormon Doctrine, 1958 compared to 1966 versions. And I went through a lot of the main changes, and you can go watch that video. But here's a few of them. Other notable changes in the second edition also include the removal of sentences stating that, so these are removed, suicide is murder, pure and simple, and murderers are damned. That is harsh. Commit suicide, you're damned. Also, no doubt psychiatry has some benefit, but in many instances it is in effect a form of apostate religion which keeps sinners from repenting. Things like masturbation, right? Psychiatry says that's perfectly normal. Nope, according to McConkie, that's something you have to repent for. So McConkie not really big on psychiatry, probably not that big on therapy. And then and that all those using condoms or other artificial contraception are in rebellion against God and are guilty of gross wickedness, using birth control, which we already kind of talked about. All right, Sterling Adams again. We'll talk a little bit about the church education system and how Mormon doctrine was referenced a lot in these old manuals. Not so much anymore. During the later 1970s and into the early 1980s, especially as Apostle McConkie began to participate on or supervise various church committees, including the Church Education Curriculum Committee, which McConkie was on, the book was quoted authoritatively hundreds of times in various church-published books and instructional manuals. All right, so in 2010, Deseret Book Company, the LDS Church's publishing and book-selling arm, withdrew from publication its popular and highly controversial doctrinal treatise, Mormon Doctrine. They withdrew it. Deseret Book bought Bookcraft, as I mentioned before. But starting even probably before 2010, but in 2010, Church wants to distance itself from this book. All right, Peggy Fletcher Stack did an article about this in 2010 in the Salt Lake Tribune entitled Landmark Mormon Doctrine Goes Out of Print. She says Deseret Book has decided not to reprint the classic volume Mormon Doctrine, said a spokeswoman, Gail Holliday. or Halliday, pictured above. Stopped it because of low sales. The demand is no longer there, said Halliday, managing director for marketing and communications. But is that really true? Is it not selling well? It was so popular in the past. All right, so a day before this, KUTV, I guess Channel 2 in Salt Lake City, also did a story on Mormon Doctrine going out of print, entitled Publisher Stops Printing Popular LDS Book, May 20, 2010. They say, despite Deseret Books citing low sales, a story published the day before on KUTV stated that local Salt Lake City booksellers reported consistently strong sales of the book. Okay, same story from KUTV. Tony Weller of Sam Weller's Books in Salt Lake stated that there is demand for Mormon Doctrine. So Weller Books, they moved from downtown Salt Lake. Now they're at Trolley Square. And now they are called Weller Bookworks, a lot smaller than they used to be. I used to like to go into the one in downtown Salt Lake. Apparently, Barnes & Noble had similar sales, in other words, stating that there is demand as well at Barnes & Noble. Okay, William Morris did a story online called Republishing Mormon Doctrine, May 27, 2010. Morris says, I've heard a similar claim that there is demand. In an email from Chris of Benchmark Books in Salt Lake. Chris Bench, I guess. So Benchmark Books saying that there is also demand for Mormon Doctrine. If you look at Amazon's sales rank starting at this time, 2010, and up even through today, it's a moderate rank. Probably a pretty decent rank compared to other church books, or for a church book. Most Mormon church books are so niche. There's not that many Mormons compared to the general population, so most of them don't have very good sales ranks. I would say Mormon Doctrine at 2010 and on has had a moderate sales rank, or a fairly decent sales rank for a Mormon book. Okay, William Morris continues, there is a perception that LDS Church is trying to distance itself from Mormon Doctrine, a view based on the removal of all citations to Mormon Doctrine from the most recent edition of Gospel Principles in 2010. Gospel Principles was a popular, and is a popular, church manual, but doesn't reference Mormon Doctrine anymore. Okay, so on that piece on KUTV, Sandra Tanner was interviewed. She says, I believe the main reason McConkie's Mormon Doctrine was taken out of print was due to its candid discussion of LDS doctrines that the church is now trying to hide, and doctrines that they moved away from. All the African American and stuff on the curse of Cain and on blacks. It's all very embarrassing. Sandra points out a bunch of other things too that are also embarrassing. All right, an article that came out on July 4th, 2024, so pretty recently, by David Noyce. He has a story on Matthew Harris on the podcast Mormon Land. So Harris says, Mormon Doctrine has been giving the church fits for a very long time. He said on the podcast, especially McConkie's writings on race. And Harris is an expert on Mormonism and race. So with no fanfare, church leaders yanked it in 2010, Harris says. His new book is called Second Class Saints. Looks to be a very good book. I've been following the podcast on Mormon Stories, which has been very good, very interesting. I've listened to 4 episodes so far. I plan to listen to all of them. Harris's books in the past have been very good. The LDS Gospel Topic Series, The Mormon Church in Blacks, 2 books on Ezra Taft Benson, one called Thunder from the Right. Okay, same article here, David Noyce, talking about this guy named Joseph Spencer, pictured above. He's a philosopher and an assistant professor of ancient scripture at church-owned BYU. Spencer sees plenty of deeply problematic pronouncements within Mormon doctrine. So we got a BYU professor saying the same things as Harris, but then Noyce goes on to kind of protect McConkie, saying one really good thing that McConkie did was through Mormon doctrine and other ways and other speeches and books, he got people to become really interested in the scriptures and really read the 4 standard works of the church. Okay, back to the Peggy Fletcher Stack article, May 21st, 2010. The audio scientist Gregory Prince was delighted by news that Mormon doctrine will no longer be published. Prince pictured above. McConkie's book, Gregory Prince says, has done some serious damage. I have to agree with that. And that's going to do it for this video. We went about an hour and 11 minutes. I encourage you, if you're interested, go watch my other video on Mormon doctrine, which I go through way more of the major changes. I talked pretty fast through that video, so if you're interested to see more of the changes, go watch that. Go watch that one. But this one is the story of Mormon doctrine and how it came to be, how it was banned, how it was republished. So I thank you for watching the Story of Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie video.